Hello, welcome back to my channel. This video is a short and sweet one for you. I'm going to be talking about the 5 most disappointing books that I read in 2023. I do this video along with my best and worst books of the year because I feel like there's just this category of books that I end up reading. They're not objectively bad, like they're not terrible reads, but they just really fucking let me down because I was expecting something from these books, right? And I want to let you know what those books are so maybe you can avoid the disappointment that I faced when I picked them up. So let me just quickly run you through the 5 books and I'll tell you exactly why they didn't work. So first up we have Hello Stranger by Catherine Center. I picked this book up because I loved The Bodyguard by Catherine Center, which I read last year. It was just so delightful and charming, and I feel like I hadn't read a true romance by this author in the past. I feel like I've mostly just read her women's fiction stuff, right? Definitely nothing with a cover like this, and so I figured Hello Stranger would be in the same vein. And it definitely had an interesting premise, right? Our heroine Sadie ends up becoming face blind after an accident she gets into, and this is a bit of a bummer because Sadie's profession is a portrait artist specifically, and she is trying to prove to her family that this is the career that she should be in, that she's good at her job, and she's going to enter into a contest that will hopefully get her some acclaim, right? But she's face blind, and that makes it really challenging for her to make portraits, so she's in a bit of a pickle. And while she's going through this tumultuous time, she's also dealing with her incredibly shitty family. She's also dealing with being in this love triangle situation between the vet that she brings her dog to, her dog who she only feeds Chinese food to, not kibble, Chinese food, and a guy in her building who she overhears on a phone call being a totally misogynistic piece of shit, but kind of proves himself to be a good guy. I was excited about this book because I thought that it would very nicely handle these sort of like harder hitting topics, right? Like a family who gaslights you, a job where you're not exactly going to excel because you no longer have the skills that job takes, falling in love again when you are face blind. Like I was excited to see how something that I don't really know much about was going to impact this person's life, and I was excited to see her triumph. Unfortunately, I feel like this book kind of bit off more than it can chew, or maybe the author bit off more than she could chew, because I feel like nothing was handled in a way that I enjoyed. The whole face blind thing should have impacted more of the story than it did. Like it definitely had an impact on every little bit of the story, but near the end of the book it kind of didn't matter, right? Like this career that our heroine is so passionate about, at the end she kind of just throws her hands up and she's like, whatever, who cares? Her family that gaslights her, she doesn't stand up for herself until the very last second, and even then it's actually the guy in her life, the guy in the love triangle she ends up with, kind of standing up for her. And then you also have the romance, which was completely underbaked and underdeveloped. It was just a total disappointment start to finish, and I got increasingly irritated as the book carried on. I think the first inkling again was the fact that she mistreats her dog, but I don't know, I think it was supposed to be quirky. It was not quirky to me. Let's move on to something else, shall we? This next one I think is going to show up on a lot of people's worst of lists as a hot take, I'm not like other girls. I didn't like Fourth Wing, and good for you, because you know what? I didn't like Fourth Wing either, but to me it wasn't the worst thing I've ever read. It was just deeply disappointing given how much people hyped it up, okay? Fourth Wing is a book about our main character Violet, and she is conscripted or forced to go to a dragon writing academy. She always thought she was going to be a scribe. She always thought she was going to be the bookish type, and she was going to do the history of her people and of her country. Instead, she's going to go to war for her country, and she's not like super jazzed about it. She has no training. She's weak. She learns quickly, and she gets, I was going to say dicked quickly. It just sounded nice, but that's not actually true. That there is maybe the world's longest fucking sex scene in this book. I think what I didn't enjoy about this book was that I was promised this like high stakes dragon fantasy book, right? With a really fantastic romance at the center of it. I didn't see either of those things, and I feel like the execution of this book was really poor. I just did a DVBC on this. If you want to see my really in-depth thoughts and feelings, I'll leave a link to that in the description down below, so you can go check it out. I read it with my husband, and we just chatted about it for about an hour. I just feel like the world building was completely lacking and kind of insulting to the reader. I think that was the thing that pissed me off the most about this book. Not only was the romance poor, not only was like the dragon stuff lacking to me, it's just not executed in the way that I would personally want it to be executed. I feel like the world building was just not there. We get thrown into a world with very little context as to what is going on, and we are expected to kind of pick things up as we go. And like, yeah, I get I'm reading a book, I should pick things up as I go, but I think it was kind of an insult to the reader as to how things were unveiled to us. And at the end of the book, when we're getting this big reveal, I was like, that shouldn't be a fucking reveal in a book. That should be you giving us the world building at the beginning of the book. I would rather a Crescent City style info dump at the beginning of the book to give me context for the world rather than the shit that was pulled at the end of this book. It was not a pleasing experience as a reader. And that's the thing, it's like I'm not above a fantasy juicy romance. I like ACOTAR, okay? But that book was plotted well. Even if you don't really like it, that's fine. If you don't like the romance, fine. But it was fairly well plotted. It made sense. It was a cohesive fantasy, and this book just wasn't that. And that was ultimately disappointing to me as someone who wants to be a girl who likes things, and I'm just not. I'm just not a girl who likes things, and I need to accept that about myself, I think, but that was a bummer. It was not my favorite. Another book that really let me down was one by an author that I really like, and this book just fell flat. It wasn't bad so much it was just lackluster, okay? The Summer I Saved You by Elizabeth O'Rourke. I love this author. She was a discovery for me last year, and I loved so many of her books that I read, but the two that she published this year just kind of let me down. I didn't love the first one, although I did give it 3 stars. This one was a 2-star read for me, and I think it's my first 2-star I've ever given her books. I don't remember the names of the characters, which is good because I have notes right here. Lucy and Caleb. This is a second chance romance. They used to have summer houses right next to each other. Lucy is going through a divorce, trying to escape her abusive husband, and she kind of falls into the arms of Caleb, who I guess has always kind of had a thing for her or something to that effect. And I think there was just too much time here spent on the escaping the abusive relationship thing. And I am all for that. Like, I want to see women succeed, and I want to see women happy and in healthy relationships, but I feel like this has been executed better in different books. I literally just got done filming a video where I talk about Part of Your World by Catherine Center, and I think that one has a really nice balance of our heroine, like, you know, healing from the trauma and escaping this person, like handling that, but also still giving so much page time for the romance. And in this book, I feel like the ex was just too much a part of it. And I understand they were like in the middle of divorce proceedings, whatever, but it made for a really bogged down romance, and not enough page time was spent with these two characters getting to know each other again and falling in love. And I think we're supposed to be convinced that he really liked her kids or something like that, the 2 kids that she escapes with, but unfortunately they had no personality, and I don't think that they really added much to the story, which I think is a disservice to children in books. I think children can be such a great impact on a romance, and in this one I think they brought the romance down. I don't know. This one was just a real disappointment for me, so I don't know. I'm gonna tread carefully with the series. I don't know if I'm gonna read the next one in the series. I might just wait until she writes something different, but yeah, this was not my favorite. Another one on this list written by an author that I've had such good success with in the past, but just didn't seem to connect with this time. Infamous by Lex Croucher. I wanted to love this book. The idea behind it, fabulous. I love a good sapphic romance, but this wasn't really that, and that's what let me down, okay? So this book's about our 2 main characters, Eddie and Rose. It's primarily Eddie's story. It's kind of told from her point of view, and at the beginning of the book, she's making out with her best friend Rose, okay? It's very clear that these 2 ladies have a thing for each other, but they're not really like willing to call it what it is, especially since this is a historical romance, and that makes sense, right? I get that. Things kind of take a turn when Rose says, hey, I'm actually gonna get married to a man. Like, I can't live with my parents anymore. Like, I'm getting older up there in age. I need to get married, right? And Eddie is a complete fucking bitch about this, right? And that's kind of my first red flag. I was like, ooh, I get you love your friend, but like, that's not cool. You understand the historical circumstances. You're in this time period. You should understand this. But she acts like a bit of an immature brat, which like, ugh, not my favorite vibe in like an adult romance. And around the same time, when Rose declares she's going to get married and kind of leave Eddie behind, Eddie ends up coming into contact with this guy named Nash. And Nash is a famous writer, which is really great because Eddie's trying to get published, right? So she kind of gets in leagues with him. He's intrigued by her, thinks she's funny, he's gonna help her with her manuscript, and he's a piece of shit. And we find that out real quickly. But she is unwilling to believe the people around her telling her like, oh, maybe he's not the best person to be associating with. And the story is literally just her making poor decisions, having her manuscript stolen by this absolute piece of dog shit of a man, eventually coming to her senses and getting back with Rose. And Rose is like, yeah, the whole reason I married a man in the first place was because I love you and he's gay. We can be together even though I'm married to this man. Like, this is actually the perfect circumstance. I did this for you. It's hard reading a book about a character so rational who deserves so much love, and the story not actually being about that person, but instead being about her dumbass love interest. It was not a fun read. It was not a fun read. It was a frustrating read. And I feel like this read so much like YA because the heroine was just so immature. It was painful. It was very painful given that I like other books by this author. So I don't know what to say. I didn't like this book and it was disappointing. Wasn't the worst thing I've ever read, but it was a 2-star read. Reading more from this author in the future, I'm going to tread a little bit more carefully. Honestly, now that I'm looking at this list, 4 of the 5 books are by authors that I've read in the past that I've enjoyed and I haven't liked their most recent entry. Often I've read a romance from this author recently and their next book hasn't been a success, and that's the case here. Do I Know You by Emily Wibberley and Austin Siegeman Broca. This book's about Eliza and Graham, and it is a marriage in trouble novel, which I was hopeful for because I really enjoyed The Roughest Draft, which is not a marriage in trouble novel, but it is a second chance, which is kind of what a marriage in trouble is, right? So I was like pretty confident that this author duo could like do something with that. Eliza and Graham go on a trip together, an anniversary trip, and they're kind of on the brink of ruin, right? Like, they just don't communicate well, they don't seem to know each other anymore, and they want to connect, and how they're going to do that is by pretending that they don't know the other person. And this is a way for them to reconnect and to let their old, I don't want to say personalities go, but to get rid of preconceived notions about each other, right? They're going to like meet each other in a different context, and it's going to save their relationship. The premise of this is flawed, obviously, and I think that's what was my big hang up about this book, was that in taking on the personalities and character traits of a different person, how are you reconnecting with your spouse? Because like the main issue that these two had was that they weren't communicating and that they had preconceived notions about the other person. Like he thought that his wife was an interesting person who didn't think he was interesting enough. And she thought that her husband was like, I don't want to say serious, but like kind of too good for her. I don't know how changing your personalities or taking on character traits of someone else or pretending to be someone you're not is going to help fix these problems. It didn't work out convincingly on page, I guess is what I'm saying. I guess you could have convinced me of this if it had been well done, and it wasn't here, sadly. This book focused more on the physical attraction to each other and getting to fuck each other in a foreign location, which is just not how you want one of these romances to go when there are such deep miscommunication issues and communication issues. I really wanted them to rekindle their love by kind of, again, like getting rid of those misconceptions and kind of quashing, I don't want to say quashing the beef, but kind of, and that just didn't happen, which was disappointing because I know this author writing duo is really capable of a lot, and I just felt like this one had an interesting idea, but the execution just certainly wasn't there. So I've rambled long enough. Those are the 5 most disappointing books I read this year. Let me know in the comments if any of these books disappointed you. I would be very curious to know. I definitely know that Do I Know You is a book that a lot of us were excited for after reading The Roughest Draft and were disappointed and let down by, but I want to know if any of the other ones were disappointing to you, and or just let me know what disappointed you this year. I'd love to know. You know, we can all commiserate in the comment section. Thanks for watching this video. I love y'all so much, and I'll see you tomorrow.